You're listening to The Bob Duco Show, continuing our discussion with Evan Roth-Smith. He is co-author, along with Doug Schoen, of the book Putin's Master Plan. And so, Evan, let's talk a little bit about his master plan. Specifically, with Vladimir Putin, we've seen the aggressive nature of him, certainly with annexing Crimea, moving into Ukraine. We see the brokered deals that he sets up with Iran and his positioning in the Middle East and helping to prop up Bashar al-Assad. And so I kind of see him as somebody who's arranging his chess pieces and really trying to hopefully one day usher in a resurgence of the old Soviet Union glory with Mother Russia heading everything up. But I don't know, is that too grandiose of a vision?
No, I mean, I think you're exactly right, and that's really what Putin wants, and that's why he does have this master plan to break up NATO and other American alliances and roll back American power and influence around the world and replace it with Russian power and influence so that he can, as you said, go about recreating his vision of a new Russian Empire or Soviet Union or whatever language he winds up using to describe it.
Okay, so let's go through some different regions here. First of all, his work in the Middle East. You've got the case of Syria and Bashar al-Assad, and Putin claims, of course, that he is almost an ally in fighting against ISIS, but you don't really get that sense. So what can we understand about how he's positioning himself with Syria and then certainly with Iran?
Well, of course, with Syria, Putin does, as you say, claim to be attacking ISIS, but we've seen, the Pentagon has found 90% of the airstrikes that Russia conducts aren't targeted at ISIS. They're targeted at, moderate rebels or what's left of the so-called moderate rebels and, other anti-Assad forces. And he doesn't really care about fighting ISIS. And in fact, one of Putin's main goals in Syria is not just propping up Assad and is not just advancing Iranian interests in the Middle East, but is making this war as bloody and as long as possible, because so long as Syria remains an incredibly bloody conflict, and we've seen bombings of schools and bombings of civilians and awful, awful images, this refugee crisis will continue. And you'll have millions of people fleeing places like Syria and Iraq and going to Europe as refugees and as migrants and so on and so forth, and destabilizing Europe. We've seen the security situation in Europe deteriorate. We've seen the political situation in Europe deteriorate because of this migrant crisis, and that's all to Putin's benefit, and he understands that.
Okay, now, why doesn't Putin, though, see the potential danger and threat from ISIS? Because ISIS may be looking to the west right now, but eventually they're going to look to the northeast, too. So why doesn't he see them as eventually a long-term threat to Russia?
Well, it's very true that ISIS could pose a threat to Russia, but of course Russia has an enormous amount of experience, and the Russian security services have an enormous amount of experience dealing with Islamic terrorism in Chechnya and places like that. And the approach they've taken to this, which is, so evil it's almost impressive, is that they have these massive databases, just like we have, of suspected domestic terrorists, Islamic terrorists. But what they'll do, whereas in America, if a suspected terrorist tries to buy a plane ticket to Syria, the FBI will arrest you at the airport. In Russia, what they'll do is let you go. They let you go, and they say, you know what, we know who he is, we know what he looks like, we know what his name is, we know what his passport is, and he's never coming back. So they'd rather let these suspected terrorists get on a plane, fly to Syria, and fight Assad, and fight for ISIS, than have them in Russia at all. So they're trying to just get them all to leave.
Hang on just a moment. We'll spend our last few minutes together next. More with Evan Roth-Smith. The book again, folks, Putin's Master Plan. It's from Encounter Books. It's by Evan Roth-Smith and Douglas Schoen, and we'll spend our last few minutes together next. A couple minutes from now here on The Bob Duco Show.